named Karim. His face was carved by the sun, lips always dry, eyes always scanning the horizon, not for beauty, but for survival. This was not a place of dreams. It was a place where hope was rationed like water. Karim belonged to a small village named Darya Tal, ironically named after a sea that never existed. Here, water was not a resource. It was a memory. A myth passed from father to son. People didn't talk about rain. They remembered it, like an old friend who had stopped writing letters. Pause. A bit slower now. Karim's life was a map of habits designed to defy death.
He would wake up before the sun, not to pray, not to work, but to feel the air while it was still cool. He'd walk to the dry well near the village center, not to draw water, but to listen. Old villagers said the earth speaks when water is near. But the earth had been silent for years. His wife, Amina, would dampen a piece of cloth and wrap it around their daughter's face as she slept.
That rag, barely moist, was their shield against the choking sand. Narration grows more reflective. Once Karim had a camel. Her name was Noor. She was his only means to travel the miles-long journey to the nearest town, 3 days away, where sometimes, if luck kissed the wind, there would be water. But Noor died last summer, died standing, as if still waiting for Karim to place the saddle on her back. That day, he cried, not because she was just an animal, but because her death made his world smaller and the town a dream too far to touch. Dramatic pause, sound of wind blowing, imagined. Now Karim walked, 35 kilometers one way. He tied empty clay pots around his waist and shoulders like armor, and he walked. Through dunes that shifted under his steps, beneath a sun that turned every breath into a prayer for shade. He had no GPS, no compass, only stars and memories of his father's stories. Follow the 3 stars that form the arrow, his father had told him. They'll lead you to the trade road. Voice softens, like remembering a quiet moment. Sometimes he'd find skeletons in the sand, not always human. Goats, camels, sometimes birds that flew too far from the skies of mercy. And he'd whisper a prayer, not for them, for himself. Because each bone was a warning, each skull a clock ticking down his own time. On the 4th journey this season, Karim fainted, halfway to the town. When he woke, his lips had cracked open, his pots were shattered, and the sun had climbed to its throne above. There was no one, nothing, just the deep, terrible sound of sand being moved by the wind. Slightly faster, tension builds. But then, he remembered his daughter's face, her eyes wide like the desert moon, her voice asking, "Baba, when will the water come back?" He stood up. He dug with his bare hands. Somewhere in the belly of the desert, a trader had once told him, water sometimes hides beneath the dunes. Not much, not enough, but sometimes enough to live. And by some miracle, some old forgotten mercy, he struck dampness. Not a spring, not a stream, just wet sand. But in the desert, wet sand is a river. Voice lowers again, emotionally rich. He filled his shirt, turned it into a sack of mud, and staggered back. No pots, no pride, just hope, hanging on his back like a dying sun. 2 days later, he returned to the village. His lips were bleeding, his feet swollen and blistered. But in his arms, he carried survival. That mud was pressed through cloth and boiled on fire 3 times over. It gave 3 people 5 days of life. And in those 5 days, the clouds returned, like guests who had lost their invitation but remembered the way. Closing voice, solemn, poetic. That night, it rained. Not much, but enough for Karim to lie down on the cracked earth and cry with the sky. Because sometimes, the desert doesn't kill you. Sometimes it watches how far you will go for those you love. And then it opens its hand just a little. Enough to remind you that life, even in the driest heart of the earth, still waits to bloom. Fade out with the soft sound of rain over sand.